Welcome, everyone. It's Buzz 360, Buzz Rothfield from every angle. And he is the veteran journo, the Sharks tragic. He's been in the game for over 50 years, so he does know what he's talking about, doesn't he? Look, arguably, he's the most confused man in rugby league, and I'm starting to become pretty confused myself. But look, he calls for one thing, then he slams the club for doing it. He praises a player, then he tears them down when they lose. And if Phil Gould is involved, it's always personal. So first up is the halves hypocrisy. Right, Canterbury needs a long-term halfback. Sexton's not the answer. Burton isn't a 7, Kenty. Or Bray. Who is it? Is that you? Is that you, Ben? Where'd you go? Paul? Paul? I can. Okay, Buzz. Look. So let's have a look at what happened. When Buzz gave his advice to Gould, because Gould needs his advice, and Phil follows Buzz's advice all the time. He doesn't think he's a clown. Or does he? Anyway, Phil went and signed Carl Oluwapu, rated as one of the best young halves or potential halves coming through the system in the country, who was unhappy with a decision made by the Broncos not to put him in the top 30. They brought Josh Reynolds, the grub, back as a mentor to the club. And in recent criticisms, which he's made about Toby Sexton, he made the same questions about Khaled Rajab when Oluwapu was signed. He's given a lot of flack to Kyle Flanagan, as has his NRL 360 counterparts. But still, now he's got a different viewpoint. It seems like he's confused. So you'd think he'd be pretty happy with the signing of Oluwapu, and you'd think he'd be pretty happy with the signing of Lockie Galvin, criticising Wests for letting him go, getting really stuck into them for letting go one of the best young playmakers in the competition, valued at $1 million. But what did he have to say on this? Buzz? You're up, Buzz. What are the Bulldogs doing? Who would let Toby Sexton go? They're on top of the ladder, Braith. Did you hear me, Braith? They're on top of the ladder. Who announces the signing of a player like Toby Sexton, who's part of their spine when they're on top of the ladder? Who would allow him to announce that he's going to the English Super League, Braith? And Reid Mahoney, don't get me stuck on him. What a great player he is. So in 2024, Buzz said Toby Sexton is solid, but he's not a long-term option. Oh, actually, let's hear that from him. It's 2024. Sexton is solid, Braith, but he's not a long-term option for the Bulldogs. So, look, the Bulldogs choose not to resign Toby Sexton, even though they got to the top of the ladder. Unexpectedly, he joins the Catalans Dragons in Super League on a $1 million deal over 2 years, where he has not secured a role with another NRL club. Buzz had something to say about that. You would think he would be pretty glowing about the fact that the Bulldogs have followed his advice and brought in a young man valued at over $1 million, when buzzers had many articles attacking the recruitment of Phil Gould and suggesting many times they needed to get an elite half. But every time we have, this is the type of response that Buzz gives. Why would you let Sexton go? That's just poor management. It's chaos. It's bordering on absolute craziness. I cannot believe they've done that, Brent. Or Brave. What's your name again? So it seems that Sexton wasn't the long-term answer. They recruit Galvin, Buzz slams it. They let Sexton go, Buzz slams it. This is called a no-win situation. And we wonder why that is. Is it a mystery, or do we know? So let's go back again to 2023. So Buzz was very critical of the Bulldogs' recruitment strategy as Cameron Ciraldo started his tenure. He'd already told everyone who wanted to hear that Gould had been at the club for 3 years, when it was actually only the second pre-season that Gould was at the club, having come late in 2021 to help the Bulldogs, who were being coached by Trent Barrett. Now, as you'll see, Khalid Rajab was a young junior that in that time Canterbury fans were hoping and believing would play a strong part in their future. So maybe Buzz was quite right to raise his opposition, but he had criticised the Bulldogs' recruitment and having no halves at the start of the season. He said, after the signing of Carla Lawapu, look, they have no idea what they're doing. They're pushing one of their local juniors out, Bray. They just don't have any idea. This goes back to Phil Gould's horrible record with recruitment since his time at the Penrith Panthers, and his greatness is an illusion. They're pushing one of their brightest junior prospects out the door, Bray. All for a kid who's got a bad attitude at the Brisbane Broncos. I can't believe Kevy would have made that promise. So look, the reality is that in 2024, or the end of 2023, Khalid Rajab joined the Newtown Jets. I may have the dates wrong, but buzzers confuse me. And some of the things that have been said may not be verbatim, but trust me, it's very, very true, and Buzz knows it. In 2024, Rajab joined the Newtown Jets, Cronulla Sharks New South Wales Cup feeder team, Buzz Rothfield's pride and joy team that he loves. Now, he's been quite a good New South Wales Cup contributor, Khalid, but as of 2025, he has still not cracked first grade for the Cronulla Sharks. So Buzz's narrative is, the Bulldogs squeezed out a future star, Brain. But the reality is, Khalid has struggled in his opportunity, and he was overtaken by a more highly rated talent, and he hasn't played NRL since. But he's still comparatively one of the elite players of the competition because he got to debut in his NRL game. Look, even Buzz's own club hasn't picked him. But what actually happened with Rajab before he left? He actually got to debut. He came off the bench in 2023 and he was quite good. The fans were quite happy with his first debut match, and it was a special occasion. The following week against the Newcastle Knights, the Bulldogs lost 66-0. Coloured started at 5'8". He was hooked after about 20 minutes. He missed 4 key tackles, and defensively was showing up by the beginning of a Newcastle Knights resurgence where they won 10 matches in a row and steamed into the final series with a lot of momentum, beating teams like the Melbourne Storm before failing in their semi-final against the Warriors in New Zealand, which would have put them into a prelim and was a very tough assignment. But Khaled has never played NRL again. But who's to say? He may get another opportunity. But according to Buzz, we let go of a star and replace them with someone that we'll criticise for doing. At the time, Buzz, Carlo Lawapu had lots of raps and he was given his debut and he was coming along very, very nicely and developed rather quickly. Unfortunately, he suffered a neck injury, which has seen him not play NRL since, and he's now gone back home and apparently is linked with the Dolphins. So not all stories turn out great for everyone, but the criticism seemed unfair when yet again Phil Gould was just taking Buzz's advice. He just seems very, very confused. So now let's talk about the Reed Mahoney meltdown. You would think with this headline that Buzz Rothfield was one of Reed Mahoney's biggest supporters. I think he's confused himself. I think he's talked about Reed so many times that he's actually developed a liking for him, potentially. Has Reed trapped in Buzz's head so much, it's almost like reverse Stockholm syndrome? I don't know. But he announces that he's signed with the Cowboys from 2026, even though he was contracted to Canterbury through to the end of 2026. And we all know the story. We really do. But Buzz, he's not happy about it. It's absolute chaos. They've driven out one of their captains, their old captain, one of their leaders, one of the next in line players for Queensland, Bray. It's an absolutely unbelievable situation there, Bray. I'm starting to forget what I've got to say, but at the same time, Phil Gould has no idea what he's doing. All this for Lachlan Galvin, Bray. But it's funny. Reed Mahoney goes on to a podcast and he's like, no, they haven't kicked me out. That's complete rubbish. I just asked to explore my future. Now, Reed asked for a release at the start of the season, or if he could start to negotiate, because Canterbury were unlikely to give him an extension after next year, or had no idea if that was going to happen. They weren't ready to negotiate. So Reed wanted to get ahead of the game, knowing we've got expansion soon, that Reece Robson has just left the Cowboys, and if his future wasn't going to be at the Bulldogs long term, if that couldn't be guaranteed, he wanted to make a move now. And that's the fact. Okay? But it seems Buzz isn't interested in what Reed's got to say about it. He's only interested in his narrative. They've got rid of Reed Mahoney. I've only ever said good things about Reid Mahoney, about his potential, about how good he is. I've never said a bad word about him. I don't know why Phil Gould, why Gus would put their season at risk. Only last week they were at the top of the ladder. It's complete madness, Brave. Or Brave. What's your name? So look, it just seems that the player makes the decision, but Buzz blames the club. But there's more with this. A lot more. Not long before, it was quite interesting because a team running second on the ladder at the time, who is now first, let go of their halfback. They let go of their halfback, who is their senior halfback in their club, been in their system for a few years, and has a great relationship with the coach. But they were unwilling to match a $600,000 offer over 3 seasons with the Manly Sea Eagles. Buzz said, "That was professional and classy departure. Full credit to Ricky Stewart and to Fogarty for how professionally that was handled." You see, it just seems a little bit weird that the departure of Toby Sexton and Reid Mahoney being criticised for being announced during the season when they're high up the ladder, yet for some reason, when it comes to the Raiders, who are high up the ladder, now first, letting go of their halfback is a really big deal to go with a long-term youth policy with Ethan Sanders and Ethan Strange. And maybe they'll sign another halfback. Or maybe they have already. I'm sure Buzz will be very, very happy with whoever they sign. Because Ricky Stewart is one of the greatest minds in rugby league. And what he's done with that Raiders side in 12 years or 15 years or however long he's been there is remarkable. One grand final and they might win it this year. And they've had to build that club from scratch, Bray. Yes, Buzz, the Raiders have done a pretty good job. And many have said it, especially on Buzz 360, where it's Buzz Rothfield from every angle. So let's compare it. Player club signed elsewhere, ladder position, and Buzz's reaction. So both players are at a club that's doing really well, both in the top 3. Their key spine player is leaving the club. At Canberra, it's a classy, professional, exit. At the Bulldogs, it's chaos. It's madness. Interesting. It's chaos. It's madness. Let me speak for myself. It's my show. Sorry, Buzz. So look, Buzz has been very, very critical of the Bulldogs' retention and recruitment, and especially since Phil Gould arrived at the Dogs. He loved the narrative of how fractured the club was when they were winning 3 games, how the board and how everybody was just in an absolute state. And he was right. The club was on its knees. COVID nearly put the club on its knees. The sponsors of the club could barely pay the money. It was in a destitute situation. The Leagues Club, which has been a great support, was in a bit of trouble. And now you look to now, how good are they going in all those areas? Everything's way up, including the Bulldogs' ladder position. but you wouldn't know it from Buzz. Wherever he can see a couple of losses, the Bulldogs are in trouble. Before Gus Gould arrived, the Bulldogs had already spent 6 years out of finals contention. That carries on in 2022 and 2023. However, the Dogs had won 14 games over those 2 years compared to the 6 games it had won between 2020 and 2021. But he talks about who we've recruited. And I think these names might paint a different picture. Stephen Crichton, captain, 3-time premiership winner, 4-time grand finalist. Matt Burton, a 5'8", who can play centre as well, and probably anywhere you wanted to put him. New South Wales and Origin representative, Australian representative, and our key playmaker, Reid Mahoney, our hooker, who's on the cusp of Origin, who he's criticised numerous times until he announced he was heading out the door so he could blame Phil Gould. Toby Sexton himself, who he's essentially hasn't backed as a long-term option, but as now seems to think the Dogs should have given Toby what he is saying he deserved. And many would agree. But it just seems at odds with what he said previously, even this year, on all these players. Viliami Kikau didn't want to sign or talk to any other club but the Bulldogs. Lachlan Galvin, criticised for leaving, Gould criticised for signing him. Jacob Preston from the North Sydney Bears and Roosters pathways, on the verge of Origin selection. Jacob Kiraz, Gould gets him back to the club for an opportunity. Whilst he had a top 30 contract at the Knights, he came to the Dogs on a train and trial. He risked it all, and Gould gave him the opportunity. Connor Tracy, Kurt Mann, Jamin Salmon, Satili Tupanua. Depth, leadership, experience. Not to mention the pathways. And the current Penrith side, full of players from the house that Gus built. But at the Bulldogs, Harry Hayes, Bailey Haywood, Lipoi Hopoi, Jack Todd, now Jethro Ridikama, Jonathan Sewer, Eli Clark, who was signed by the Sharks, but debuted here, and Mitch Woods on the cusp, Jack Underhill on the cusp, and plenty of others making their way to the Bulldogs NRL side. But there's a real agenda there. If Buzz Rothfield talks about Phil Gould, if there's any positive compliment, it is always finished with a but and then some snide remark or dig. If Gould signs nobody, it's poor roster management. If he signs someone, it's too many changes. If we lose, it's I told you so. If we win, there's still chaos. These quotes, just to rehash what's happened. Buy a long-term half, Phil. You're hopeless, Phil. Signing Galvin is just bringing chaos to the club. Sexton's not a long-term solution. Why are they letting Sexton go? It's a disgrace, Brain. Now Mahoney's been forced out as well. Oh, Fogarty's exit was handled so professionally, so beautifully, Bray. And aren't they doing so well? Let go of their halfback, Bray. Rajab's been squeezed out so they could get Olawapu, and it has been in Josh Reynolds. I have serious questions about their recruitment, Bray. Rajab hasn't played since 2023 in the NRL when he made his debut with the Bulldogs. But some of the really bad stuff from Buzz. I'm not even going to put this for you to see on the captions. In 2024, Buzz released a story late at night that says John Curry has been axed from the Bulldogs in a coup, essentially stabbed in the back by the man he brought to the club in Phil Gould, essentially saying that Gus pushed for John Curry to be removed from chairman of the board. John got to speak the next night at our season launch, in which he was hoping to release the news then. John was very complimentary of the entire board and his successor. There had been a detailed plan that John was going to step back but stay with the Bulldogs in the role of deputy and continue working to see his dreams of the Bulldogs becoming one of the biggest, most successful clubs that Australia has ever seen. Yet Buzz took that from him. And I got to interview John last year, where he just spoke so glowingly of what happened. He spoke the truth. And it just was really disappointing to see the Bulldogs making a transition from a personal decision in conjunction with the board on how this transition was going to work and how it would benefit the club, but also benefit John Curry personally. And Buzz had to, for a little cheap headline, for another crack at Phil Gould, who is just idolised by John Curry when you listen to him talk about the man. It just shows you that Buzz Rothfield has absolutely nothing credible to say when it comes to any team that Phil Gould is with or has been with, because he gets so confused that he doesn't seem to remember that when the club does the things that he says they should do, that he then criticises them for it anyway. And it's hilarious. Anyway, that's Buzz 360, Buzz Rothfield from every angle. Have a good night and go the Dogs.